Hi everybody, and welcome back to my modeling channel. So today we are going to build a CRJ900 scale 144 from BPK. So let's see, open the box and see what we have inside. So initially we're going to start with the instruction sheet. So it's an A5 format in color, and on the first page you have all the kit description with the photo edge part, the mask, the resin parts, decals options. So you have all the instructions, and these look pretty straightforward, I have to say, and nothing too difficult. And then we come back to the last page, where you have the first option is to design the CRJ900 of Lufthansa, and the other options is to do it with the old livery of SAS. So now we're going to move on to the decal sheet, and as we can see, you have one plate is basically with all the panel lines and doors, windows, windscreen options, both common for both CRJs or old CRJ, and the second option is just these decal sheets for SAS or Lufthansa. And now we're gonna move to the mask parts, and you also have all the masks for passenger windows, the wheels, and the cockpit or the windscreen. So that's the first part of that kit description. Now we're gonna open the whole box and see what we have. So the fuselage, as you can see, is a clear part, entire clear part, and might be a little bit of a challenge because you have to do the joint between the left and the right side, especially on the windscreen. But we'll see what we can get with this. And then you have the options of course, closing all the passenger windows. Plastic is pretty, it's not so thick, and you have all the panel lines and everything, the rivets, and it's a very fine engravement. Now we're gonna move on to the next screws, where you have basically the underbelly or the rear tail ends, the fin, the nose cone, the winglets on both sides. I think this part is common for the CRJ7 and 900, and that's what we have here. And the last sprue is basically the wings and the belly or the wings fairing. You also have the flaps fairing, who are nicely designed. Everything is a very fine engravement. So that gives you a good idea of that little kit. Now we have some resin parts as well, and those are for the engines. And basically you have the intakes with the fan and the tailpipe, who are very well detailed, I have to say, and nothing to say too much about it. Very fine details on that model. Model also come with some photo edge parts, and those photo edge parts are for mainly all the antenna, and you also have all the pitot probes, gear doors, and so on. So very nice little kit. I'm sure we're gonna enjoy building this. So enough of talking, and let's start building. So we're gonna start this build by preparing the cockpit of that CRJ900, as this time I would like to have it appear. So I will only use masking tape to protect the passenger windows and the cockpit window. So initially I'm gonna prepare all the parts, and later on we're gonna start painting and weathering this cockpit. The kit provides also some decals for the center pedestal, the instrument and the circuit breakers panel located behind the pilot seat. So that was, I have to say, very handy and didn't require too much work. After this, we're gonna add our pilot seat and then we're gonna start painting them. Of course, on that small scales, you are not you're not able to see all the little details that you're making, but nevertheless, it still gives a little bit more realistic taste to those models. So now we're putting the yoke, and I have to say that it was quite hard because the parts is very small and very delicate, and it broke into pieces, so I had to rework on them, of course, and trying to set them up. Now we're going to put the nose wheel well under the cockpit, and we're going to glue the parts together. Then we're going to revert to our cockpit, and this time we will start painting the yoke and the seat belt, and for this you use a standard Tamiya matte black color. After the cockpit, we're going to start working on those engines, and I have to say that it requires a little bit of fiddling. As you can see, the engine exhaust is not very easy to work with, so we're going to use some super glue to be able to fill this up. So we're going to glue basically the cowling together, and then we're going to add some super glue on the back to be able to keep the engine exhaust together. Then we're going to start to work on the engine mount, and that's, have to say, it's working pretty easily. Generally the fitting of this model is pretty easy, I have to say. Now that the fuselage is prepared, we're gonna glue the cockpit into the fuselage initially, and like this we're gonna be able to close it later. But then we'll have to add of course some extra weight. But before that we're gonna start working on the wings. So I would say the big disadvantage of this kit is you have all the mold, basically all the plastic coming from the mold on the part itself, so you have to do some extra cleaning when you finish to remove them from the sprue. So this is a little bit extra work, but with a little bit of time everything again goes very easily. So now we're gonna add the weight in our airplane, and for this I'm using some modeling paste. As you can see, the color is quite bright, so what I will do is I will paint the inside in metallic color like this. You won't see anything through the window. So we now got the fill up all the gaps on those engines. We're gonna start working, and I'm using some white Tamiya putty as the curing time is a little bit lower. Then what I will do to avoid scratching my windscreen, I'll have to do some protective tape on the windscreen itself, and like this I'll be able to put the putty and sand it down a little bit later on. So we're gonna fill all the gaps on that model, on the fuselage, the wings and the engines. After the curing time, it's time to remove the extra putty, and for this I will use some sandpaper and water, and I use a 600 basically grit sandpaper, and that's enough basically to get everything down and to get a pretty nice surface as well. Now we're gonna add the fin and the engines on that fuselage, and that's gonna be the last part before going home, and then I'll be able to do it later on. I'll finish the model when I arrive home. After putting the winglets, we're gonna now remove those little holes, and of course with some putty, and then of course sanding down to proper shape. Now during the transport, unfortunately I broke the fin, so that required a little bit of extra work later on, so we had to re-glue it. And now we're gonna do the final part of the build by putting the wings on the fuselage. We'll need some clamps as well, as the fitting was a little bit touchy. Then we're gonna add some putty to fill up all the gaps. And later on I realized as well that the fuselage was a little bit broken on the top, so I had to add a little bit later on some putty, and basically closing all the gaps that I had on the upper fuselage. So we're now going to put the horizontal stabilizer on the tail, and before that as well there will be a little bit of a preparation for the ADF antenna, if I remember correctly, or one on the antenna located below the fuselage. So we're going to put this one first, then we're going to try to prepare the part, the horizontal stabilizer, but as you can see the hole on the tail was not big enough, so I had to use a driller to get it at the proper size, and then we're able to fit the horizontal stabilizer without any further issue. So when it was dried, when the glue was dried out, it was time to fill the gaps again with some putty. Now that we finished the build, we're gonna start putting the masking tape, initially on the windscreen and then on the passenger windows, as I want to keep them clear up, and I will basically paint over them, and to have a proper, a nice little aircraft with original windows instead of using, like I normally do, using any type of window decals. It's now time to paint those engines, so I will paint the intake, and for this I'm using the same mix as the Corga, which is a dark grey with a little bit of a metallic paint. Then what I did is I protect the intake of the engines, and I will be putting some, because I will have to paint as well the cowl anti-ice, and that will use a different color. So after that we're gonna do a primer coating. As you can see, I didn't film this, and then I realized basically the hole on top of the fuselage, so I filled it up, and then once it was all removed, I re-put a coat of primer, and like this I had no more issue for the build, and everything was perfectly done. Then I put some dull aluminium color for the engine anti-ice, and that worked perfectly. And then while this is drying, we're going to use some metallic paint on the brush for the wheels, and then we're going to start painting all our undercarriage. So after that we're going to go back to the paint booth, and we're going to start painting our engine. And for this I use my own mix, and I was using basically picture some orange color and red color to get that proper red-orange from SAS, and I have to say that sometimes finding the right color can take a little bit of time. Once it was finished, we painted a blue coat on the tail, and then we're gonna use a kind of gray creamy color, and actually Tamiya has the perfect one. It's called deck tan color, and you can find this one, but it's a matte color, so you'll have to put some varnish after painting the overall aircraft. But this is the closest paint I could find for this SAS fuselage. We are now on the last stage of the build. We're gonna use the decals. I have been using those BPK decals, and I have to say that they were very easy to handle. They are quite solid as well, thin enough, so it was never an issue to be able to do the proper decaling and to work on them. After that, putting a little bit of decal solution, and they would adhere perfectly on the model, and I have to say that I was very happy about the final result. So now we're gonna add basically the photo edge part. There is those two little fin who goes on the tail of the aircraft, and there is the gear doors as well. So I had to use a metallic file to remove the extra metal after the cut, and then we're gonna be able to glue them on the model. And after that I will be using a regular, basically now we're gonna use some super glue to put them on the aircraft itself, and then we'll use a regular paintbrush. I've been using just a paintbrush to be able to to put the fin and all those gear doors on the model. Now we're going to add a little bit of weathering, and for this I'm using always a mix of dark pastel, water and soapy water, and then I'll put them on the model, and then of course I will let it dry and use a humid cloth or a cotton buds to remove the extra wash. And I have to say that it's been working very well for me, and sometimes if I put too much it's very easy to remove the extra wash. It gives a little bit, and if you don't have enough, you can. It's a very forgettable solution, and I have to say that I'm very happy with that, because sometimes if you put too much of this solution, you may damage the painter or the paint. So for me, this is my trick, and that's what I've been using. So this is the final result of that CRJ900 from BPK on the SAS livery. I hope you enjoyed that build with me. If you did so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the movie as well, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you soon for another build review on model review. Thank you for watching.